everyone, welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and we are back again with someone else from the community to talk about who they are and what they do. Today, that person is Joe Dery. Joe is an artist who explores and experiments with visual storytelling, creating animated films, comics, prints, books, and multimedia performances. She's a multi-creative person. Her short films have screened at many film festivals. She's received grants and won awards for her wide-ranging and diverse work, including a Ewing Award last year. Jo teaches film studies at Keene State College, and her latest project is Adoption Stories, and we're going to be talking about that a bunch today. A local collaboration inspired by her lived experience as a parent of a child who was adopted through the foster care system. Welcome, Jo.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Wendy.
Yeah, it's very exciting to have you on, partly because your name has been mentioned to me, and it's been all through the adoption stories. So yeah. I didn't know that you have a whole background in art and filmmaking as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how the adoption stories came out of everything that you've done so far. Yeah. And you grew up outside of Providence, Rhode Island?
Yes. Yep. Right over the state line in Massachusetts.
Yes. Yeah. Not quite a Rhode Islander.
Not quite. Right. In spirit, a Rhode Islander.
Well, you're close to the ocean, which must have been really nice.
Yeah. It's really,
growing up there. Mm-hmm. And when you were a kid, were you involved with art?
Yeah. I mean, I was always drawing, and I think, when I was younger, people commented like, "You're good at that," and so I did it more. And then when I was in high school, just was very lucky to have an art teacher who, encouraged me and brought to my attention that there was such a thing as art school, and you could go to college to study art, and so I was able to pursue that.
And that art school you went to was just a couple miles away from your house.
Yeah, it was.
It's the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence.
Yeah.
And when you were there, did you go in with an idea of what you wanted to study?
Yeah, I wanted to study painting originally. And then I learned more about the film department and kind of zeroed in on that really quickly. I think I also was exposed to, once I got to art school, I was more exposed to a kind of filmmaking that was less about entertainment and kind of more about being connected to fine art. And so that kind of broadened my exposure and interests, and I sort of saw a way to take that interest in like painting and bring it to filmmaking. You
bring that element to it, and I think that so having a background in that would make sense.
Drawing and writing have been the constants. I work across a lot of mediums, but every project involves some drawing and writing. Yeah.
And when you say writing, how has that kind of developed over the years?
A lot of it comes out in a sketchbook practice. I always keep a sketchbook, and I am always writing and drawing in that book. I have many filled up at this point in my life, and sometimes I keep a document on my computer, and I set a goal of 250 words, and I just try to hit that goal just to sort of generate some material.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Having a practice and following through is a big deal.
It is. And I don't all the time follow through. Very much. Yeah. So.
Yeah. But you have incorporated writing into your work in different ways.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, some projects require scripts to be written. And, even if it's not a script, sometimes even something like an exhibit of drawings will benefit from some wall text that can just help create a framework for how people are going to experience that.
Is it usually one thing or the other? Is it something that catches your eye or catches something in your mind that you want to continue exploring?
Yeah. Pretty much. I mean, I have a very strong imagination that's kind of always firing on all cylinders. So sometimes it's, it's an image that I think of, or sometimes it's a process that I'm imagining. Oh, what if I did this? What if I tried that? Yeah. And, I think the ones that kind of stick around and, don't, they, of course, they're going to change and evolve into other things. But I think when you have sort of images or sounds or stories clunking around in your head and they just won't leave, then typically those are the ones that I think are strong enough to become a project that I'll devote some time to.
Right. It becomes part of you, part of your psyche a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Early on, you were, I think, out of RISD, you were part of AmeriCorps.
When I first graduated from college, I joined the AmeriCorps program, and I worked at a nonprofit doing a lot of arts education with kids, and this was in South Providence. And then meanwhile, I also was starting an art collective with a group of people, and we were sort of rehabbing a building to be live-work studios. And that space is actually still there. It's called the Dirt Palace. It's in Providence, Rhode Island.
Yeah. Downtown?
It's not downtown. It's in a neighborhood called Olneyville.
Olneyville.
Yeah.
Oh, never heard of that.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's still there. That's great.
Yeah.
And so you created this, and were you collaborating at that time, or did you have your own studio?
I've always collaborated with people to some degree or another. After graduating from college, one of the things I did was I organized a film festival, a women's film festival, and paid myself $1,000 for a year's worth of work. And then I used that $1,000 to buy a 16 millimeter camera. And then I made my first film with that camera, just in my apartment, in animated film.
At some point, you got involved with the Narragansett Tribe School.
Yeah. When I returned to graduate school, I did a Master of Fine Arts through Goddard College, which was wonderful, and just closed last year.
Right.
Yeah. But one of the requirements of my graduate program was to do a practicum project where I kind of took my art practice into a new context. First, I approached this organization called the Tamacog Museum, which had a school right next door to it, the Nuituan School. And that was one of, I think, 3 schools for Indigenous children on the East Coast. So it was a one-room schoolhouse, K through 8. And I sort of, I invited myself in and asked if they would collaborate with me. And we ended up taking a traditional Narragansett story and adapting it into a short animated film. And
that film got shown in a couple pretty cool places, right?
It did, yeah. It showed in a few children's film festivals, and it showed at the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian.
I watched it, and it's really fun to watch.
It is,
and also knowing that the kids did everything. I didn't realize till you told me that they also did the animation.
Yeah, they did it all.
And the fact that it was screened nationally and everything got really some acclaim, it's very impressive. Must have been great for the kids.
Yeah, probably a faint memory for them, but it was really fun.
Was that your introduction to oral tradition, or were you already interested?
I think a lot of my early work is like very inspired by myth and folklore.
Right.
And, in the past 10 years, that has kind of shifted to be a little bit, my storytelling is a little more autobiographical. So I think it was a natural collaboration for me to seek out, working with the Nuituan School in part because I was really curious, how do, if there are cultures that have an oral tradition, oral storytelling tradition, like what happens when you introduce digital tools into, because I remember one of the, in part of the research for that project, I spoke to a storyteller, and she said that as she would retell some of these Narragansett stories, she would add modern details. So it's that sort of like the way that a traditional story will change over time was really interesting to me.
Yes, and that of course would be the organic process of the oral story.
Yeah.
As you said, Joe, that your filmmaking or your visual storytelling has become more personal over the years. Yeah. Was there a time when that happened? Was there something that you wanted to start exploring?
As I got older, I was a little braver to sort of like be a little more open. Yeah. But the big event that happened in my life that I made a project about was that I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called lupus. And so I ended up sort of creating a project about that. And there was I just spoke about it directly. Like there wasn't really, whereas previously the storytelling was personal, but it wasn't necessarily about me.
Yeah, right. Yes. And doing that, was that helpful for you?
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
You got to express in a different kind of way, right?
Yeah. And that project was sort of, I refer to it as an illustrated essay. It's a piece of writing, and then images accompany it, and it was performed as kind of a slideshow at an event in Chicago. So I was invited to create something for this event, and that's what was happening in my life at the time. That's what I felt compelled to make something about.
How was that for you to be there and to see that?
It was great. Yeah. I mean, I lived in Chicago for a number of years and was part of just an amazing community of cartoonists and illustrators, and just they were a really inspiring bunch of people. That one of the things that was happening at the time was a event where cartoonists sort of did live performances of comics, and so it was a wonderful series of events.
And again, it was a collaboration in terms of the venue.
Yep.
Let's talk just a little bit about teaching.
Sure.
Because you've been doing that for a while now.
I have. A pretty long time. Yeah. I love being in the classroom. I love sort of like, the classroom of students. It's like a miniature community. And I love trying to make that as inclusive and welcoming a place as I can. And I love talking about creativity. So I think that is something that really lights me up.
Yeah.
And it's great to be able to have a job where you can do that.
Joe, at some point, you started foster parenting.
I did.
Yes, and so you kind of opened up into a whole different world, it sounds like.
Yes, very much so.
And you brought a project out of all of that experience.
Yeah. Again, like I think most of my projects, most of my work comes out of whatever I'm experiencing. And like I said, it's personal, but it's not necessarily always about me.
Yeah.
So Adoption Stories grew out of a proposal I submitted for the Town Arts Fund with my collaborator, Tamara Evanson. And she is actually a therapist and an adoptive parent herself. And, originally we were going to make a film much like the film I made with the Nui Tuan students. We were going to work with kids who had been adopted through foster care and make a film using paper puppets, and then the pandemic happened.
Right.
Yeah.
All of your plans, where did they go?
They just into the ether.
Really?
Yeah. So we were actually part of the first cohort of Town Arts Fund grantees, and we would all meet on Zoom and in those early months of lockdown and try to figure out how we could adapt our projects to be safe.
Yeah.
And so we, instead of making a film with kids where we would all be touching scissors and bending over our animation together, we decided to kind of pivot and do a series of audio interviews that we could do outdoors and at a distance.
Right.
Yeah.
And you did.
And we did,
do
yeah.
that. Yeah.
So we set about conducting interviews with adoptive parents and adopted children, as well as some area social workers and therapists, and one adult adoptee. So she was in the foster care system, and now she's in her 60s.
Did you have a format for that?
Yeah, we had a set of questions that we shared with everybody beforehand, and Tamra, I think she was so instrumental in crafting questions that weren't just about the past. They were sort of about, about sort of like what is your family like now? What are your dreams for the future? And it really allowed space for both memories and so because talking about adoption, it can be really painful. We launched the series in October. And so there's 9 interviews up on our website. And we did 2 local events. We did an event at the Brooks Library and the Putney Library. And that was great. People came out to learn more about the project. And so, now I'm just trying to continue spreading the word, especially as the town is considering its funding for human services, and that does include, the Town Arts Fund is on the chopping block.
Oh, yeah.
So, I think really wonderful things have come out of the Town Arts Fund, and I'd love to see it continue.
Yeah, and this is the Brattleboro Town Arts Fund, and is that in addition to the Windham County Arts Fund? Arts Council.
So the grants are administered by the Arts Council, which So,
but it's sort of a Brattleboro project.
It is, yeah.
And again, you're collaborating with local people, with local stories.
Yep.
Yeah. How was that for you?
It was great. It was really emotional. I think when I was editing the pieces of audio, I could tell that I was going through a lot. I think being a parent in the pandemic was pretty harrowing, and I could hear in my voice that I was going through a lot of things. But I learned, it is a really diverse collection of perspectives on foster care and adoption. And there's an incredible amount of wisdom in there. Right. Very hard-earned wisdom from children, families, professionals. So for anyone, looking to be a foster parent or an adoptive parent, I think it's a great resource.
Oh, that's really wonderful.
Yeah.
And it is very wide-ranging.
It is, yeah. We talked to a family in Westminster, and the Kavanaugh family, and their interview is hilarious. They're really, really funny. We talked to a social worker from NFI, Northeastern Family Institute. We talked to Abby, who's an adult adoptee, and talked about her experience decades ago. And so, that you do get, it is sort of organically, it became a really nice collection of perspectives. And we're not journalists, so it's not something that is the there's no objective truth that I'm
Right.
trying to share.
Yeah,
It's a glimpse
Yeah.
from like many different perspectives about this topic.
And again, it's people telling their stories, their real stories. There's
Yeah.
one thing, and I don't know who said this, but they were talking about being adopted or adopting, being the adoptee or the adopted, and creating a narrative identity.
Yes.
Which I thought was
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah.
And that, one of the things that they talked about was cultivating trust in self,
Yeah.
empathy for the birth family,
Yeah.
and safety and community.
Yeah. The idea behind it was to think about, like an adopted child who entered foster care very much has a narrative of their life that was, at one point, it was dramatically interrupted.
Yeah.
They were removed from their family, which is, as disruptive as it can get when you're a child. And so, how do you make sense of that? How do you go forward and sort of like stitch one section of life to another? And, but it's also required so that you can have a cohesive, story,
Right.
and then be able to carry that as part of your identity, So,
Have you seen that happen?
yeah, I mean, I think with even my own son, the way you tell the story changes as they age.
Right.
Like you take, and different participants in the project talk about this, that you're always adapting that child's story for an age-appropriate version.
Right.
And so, as they get older, you might give a few more details. Or, when they're younger, when my son was in foster care, one of the main characters of the story was the judge. The judge is going to decide what happens. And then as the story goes on and he ages, like that character of the judge is not in the story, but maybe some other characters appear.
Right.
So it's an understanding of his life that is shifting,
Right.
as he ages.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
visual
Yeah.
as you're speaking,
Yeah.
just to see, to envision that.
Yeah.
And the influences
Yeah.
that come in and that come and go. And I think, it's true for all of us that there are things we remember and things we forget in the course of our lives. But what are the things that were under the radar, that really shaped us?
Yeah.
And a lot of them are just, very subtle, very subtle. And I would guess that kind of the most important thing is kindness in some ways, understanding, listening.
Yeah.
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 How old is your son now?
He's 14.
That's a teenager.
Yep, it sure is. Yeah.
And how old was he when he came to you?
He was 5.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So.
He's really little. He just started school, kindergarten. Yeah.
And how was he in the midst of this project?
So both Tamara and I are not participants.
Oh.
We decided to sort of like facilitate and focus it on other folks.
Yeah.
And so I think that was another kind of creative decision that at a certain point you have to make, like, is there going to be an interview with me and my son or Tamara and her children? Like, we both sort of just decided, like, it wasn't something that we felt compelled to do, and that we had sort of created something that held enough diverse perspectives to feel complete. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've got a project completed. Is there any thought of adding to it at some point? Because I know your original idea.
Yeah. Well, but it's really interesting. I think people, I'm not a podcaster, but it is a collection of audio episodes.
Yeah.
And so it's currently hosted on a website and on a podcast app.
Yeah.
So you can kind of choose how you listen to it. But I don't think I'll be doing more interviews like that.
Or adding art to it at all, do you think?
I don't think so. I think I'm ready to go on to the next thing.
You are.
Yeah.
And that's something you
Yeah.
feel in your bones, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
You know,
Yeah.
you know, I think that almost every artist is asked, how do you know when a painting or a film or whatever is done?
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know,
Yeah.
sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
You know, and I have a friend who goes back in for over the course of years.
Yeah.
And changes things.
Yeah.
You know, with canvases that he still, you know, that he has around. So
Yeah.
everybody's process, of course, is different.
Yeah.
But it's interesting.
Yeah.
Also, because you know, this is such an interesting subject that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people know about it. Abby Jacobson was on the show
Yeah.
a couple years
Great.
ago, and
Great.
she told her story, which was
Yeah.
really fascinating and
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And now she's a counselor, you know.
Yep.
So it's also to let folks in the audience know, and that's another thing I think, that there are many resources available for adoptive people.
Actually, on the Adoption Stories website, there's a resources page. So you can click on that, and there's a whole list of resources. And
You know, I printed
The
that
area.
out. I was
Oh, great.
amazed.
Yeah.
Vermont Consortium for Adoption and Guardianship, Vermont Child Welfare Training Project, Voices
Yeah.
at the Table. It goes on and on. So
Yeah.
if folks
Yeah.
are interested,
it's
and-
adoptionstoriesvt.com.
Got it. Okay. And
Yeah.
that information will also be at the end of the show when we
Great.
roll the credits.
Okay.
So so people can get in touch with you.
They sure can, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
And they can go to your site, which will also be at the end.
Okay, great.
And so they can listen to the stories. And one last thing is that you mentioned the word, you know, the story stitching together. Stitching actually was a component in this.
Yeah, I heard myself say that, and
Yeah.
I wasn't on purpose. But yeah, there is the interface of the website looks like a quilt.
Yeah.
And each square is a different interview, and so you can click on a quilt square and listen to that person. And you know, the reason it's a quilt is that one of the participants, Lissa Schneckenberger, who also does the underscore, all of the violin, that is all the fiddle throughout the interviews is played by Lissa. She says that, you know, like an adopted child's identity is kind of formed like a quilt. It's kind of one patch at a time. You stitch it together, and the patches, you know, the fabric comes from different sources. And so it's not linear.
Yeah.
And most of, you know, I would actually, all of my art projects are kind of exploring non-linear storytelling. So this visual metaphor of a quilt was really helpful and useful to think about narrative identity, but sort of give it a visual form in the interface of the website. And it's not just any quilt, actually. It's a quilt that my grandmother, Ada, made, and she was actually orphaned by the time she was 14. I think both her parents had died, and she was raised by her godparents, who I believe were just her neighbors. And yeah, she had to grow up really fast. She had to grow up quick.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you still have that quilt?
I still have the quilt. Yeah.
Excellent. That's great.
Yeah.
That's a good story, Jo.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah, this is
Thanks.
a great show, and
Thanks.
great stories that are stitched together.
Yeah.
Thanks for being on.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks to all of you folks for joining us today with Jo Dery and all of the amazing things that she does with art and storytelling. Check out the information at the end of the show. You can get in touch with her site, with her, and with the organization. So stay tuned. We'll be back next time, and thanks for tuning in today.